We are living in 1930s Germany. This is something that I have said on this show. You've heard on this show many times, I think since October 7th. And the further we get from October 7th, the clearer it becomes that that is the case, and the less the less the people who are the people who are making this 1930s Germany, the less they try to hide it. Yesterday, or not yesterday, Saturday's protest in London was one of those moments where I think we saw that taken to the next level. We're going to talk about that today. Welcome to the reality show, day 178 of the war in Israel. I'm joined by Marco, Richard, Morgan. Hey guys, Morgan, I'm going to go to you first.
Sure. So I guess this initial thing we're going to be talking about that happened at the protest was that a lady went up to a police officer to report that one of the people at the protest was holding a swastika. And an
Wait,
inter
sorry to interrupt you, but should we actually play the clip and then talk about it? Do you want
Sure.
to? All right, Daniel, do we have that clip ready?
Would you like to walk with me? Because I can point these people out to you. And again, I was told when I asked that a swastika was not necessarily anti-Semitic or disruptive to public worship. That doesn't seem right to me.
Okay, so I think the symbol in of itself.
It is.
Oh my God, film. Please, film. Please, for the love of God, film.
It is anti-Semitic.
So, is this
not allowed?
Sorry, I didn't say it wasn't.
Can I just ask the question? I'm just asking a question,
I didn't say it wasn't.
Can if someone is carrying a sign that's a swastika, you said you wouldn't arrest them on the spot. It has to be investigated online.
Yes, it is. In what?
A swastika in and of itself is not anti-Semitic.
There's nothing more anti-Semitic than.
You're aware of the Public Order Act and the legislation that we work under, madam?
A swastika is a swastika.
Madam, I can have the conversation with you. I'm
happy to, but I'm just confused as to what's confusing about a swastika.
There are various facets to the Public Order Act, okay?
Yes.
So in this sphere, we're working under things called Section 5 of the Public Order Act, Section 4A of the Public Order Act. There's some of the primary legislation we're using, all right? So if you go away and have a look at that, and it's all about if it's something's likely to cause harassment, alarm, or distress, if it is written, or there's written words, or there's spoken words that are abusive.
All right.
So sorry,
Should we pause it? All right, we can go back to the rest, but Morgan, yeah.
Well, just to say that's not an April Fool's joke. That police officer really is that foolish. So the lady was reporting is obvious that someone was holding a swastika, and he ums and ahs about it and waves his hands and says it depends on the context, maybe not necessarily anti-Semitic. What I thought he was going to say was a kind of cliched meme that goes around the internet sometimes. I don't know if you've seen it, where people will say something like, oh, the swastika is a Buddhist symbol of peace. You know, it's not necessarily anti-Semitic. I thought he was going to come out with that, and he doesn't in the video. Now, the officer is right that the context is relevant. And what is the context for the swastika in the Western world since the Nazi Party came to be? It's a symbol of Nazism. Now, it's true that before that, the religious connotations in India and so on, and you'll find it on the spines of Kipling's books for that reason on old copies. However, because the context of the symbol changed and what the symbol symbolizes has changed, you won't find publishers putting on the spines of Kipling's books anymore. Why? Because it's an intensely anti-Semitic symbol, a symbol of the greatest persecutors and murderers of the Jews in all of history. So the context is very relevant, and the context for showing a swastika at the pro-Palestine protest going on in London is obvious and doesn't need this sort of dissection or anything like that. So, you know, one of the things that we're seeing here, and which we're going to be talking about, is the way in which people don't recognize anti-Semitism when it's right in front of them, or pretend not to. And I think that's something that we're seeing going on there with that police officer. And, you know, maybe he's just uncomfortable about being given a load of rubbish, although the lady wasn't actually giving him that much rubbish. But even so, it's a dereliction of his duty to have done what he did.
Marco.
Yeah, it's not just a dereliction of his duty as a policeman, it's a dereliction of his own humanity. There is no way that a guy of his age wouldn't be aware what the swastika means in the Western world. As you said, you represent the organization of the Nazi who caused the death of over 6 million people less than 100 years ago. So there's no excuse on earth why you wouldn't be able to concede that point. The issue here is that, first of all, it shows how broken the policing in Britain is today. As Razi said, it's not just an issue of living in the 30s. It's even worse. Here, people know exactly what good and bad is, but they choose to protect the bad in order to, I don't know, they can't even see the good anymore. And second is also an indictment of education in these days, where good and bad, well, there's some good and some bad in everything. And therefore you jettison everything which is good, because even the best thing, has got some bad in it. So why should you focus on that? And I'm slightly sorry about this policeman particularly, because chances are he's just a product of the current culture that's being pushed in the Met Police today. He's probably too afraid to make the point that, yes, man, you're right, that's unacceptable, because probably he's been trained to make sure he doesn't offend anyone at any point. And you can see him trying to do an impossible balance, juggling act here, but it's inexcusable. He had the choice, he had the chance to say you're right, and he chose not to do it, and that's really, really appalling.
Yeah, I think lots of different things come together in this particular story. I mean, one of them is the nature of concepts themselves. And I just want to back up a minute and look at how some of these words are used. Words like racism, for example, or homophobic, before we get to our anti-Semitism, because the nature of these flabby concepts that are thrown around half the time, where you're told 1 minute that trees are racist or yogurt is racist, or whatever, and then when an actual racist incident comes up, people aren't primed to notice it in that way, because they're primed to eye roll at the term, because that's what they've been practicing for every time they hear it in a ludicrous context. Now, this isn't a ludicrous context. This is a context where there's a protest about a war that involves Israel, and obviously the swastika has significant meaning here. And not only that, but also you've got to look at how symbols have been used recently, how important they sometimes are, and how unimportant they are when they don't need to be. For example, I mean, these are the same police who will kneel for BLM, for example, or will wear pride armbands at different times when the symbol is everything, and to go against it would be sacrilege. But at the same time, there's this contradiction that if a neo-Nazi was walking around with the swastika, far right group was doing it, they would be arrested immediately. So it's to do with who is the victim, who is in the pyramid of the offended at any given point, and where do they sit in the popularity contest and the who are we afraid to arrest contest, and that determines policing policy, which only goes to show that our former Home Secretary Suella Braverman was right, that two-tier policing does exist on British streets because contradiction is entertained all the time.
Now, there was, I have to say, I've watched the clip a few times. I lived in this country long enough that I should probably understand a Cockney accent better than I currently do, but I may have gotten some of it wrong, in which case I will rely on the indigenous people of Britain on this panel to help me out. But was he making some case about public order, and this is not, I have to decide whether this is going to violate public order? Like, Morgan?
Yeah. So he starts bringing up the Public Order Act, which outlaws racial discrimination, and basically is a way of saying, look, I can't per se do anything unless there's kind of something spoken or offense is given. But he ultimately goes on to say, look, it's depending on the context, which is the real key thing that he's actually trying to get at. And as a way to say that it's too vague for me to do anything about it. And of course, it isn't vague at all.
Yeah, so all right, so maybe I didn't fully understand, but yeah, to me the issue is how can you talk about anything related to public order and say basically, okay, yeah, there are certain laws, there are certain things that I should prevent if they're happening, but this is going to be a problem public order wise, and of course, uh, we've seen it. This was the same protest where people were arrested and then the police were surrounded, right? And then the arrested were released. So basically, you can get away with anything if you are, no matter if the police are there, if you're willing to at least show or threaten to, respond with violence. And everything about these protests is violence. What they're saying is an advocacy for violence. When they see something or somebody they don't like, they are violent towards them. If they see people with different views, they're violent. And the police is there standing, watching, and protecting them from their victims and potential victims. So these protests should be scary, not just because enough people have these views to fill a bigger part of the street than a crossing. But the fact that the government allows it to happen and does nothing to try to prevent it. And of course, culturally, it tells us, we know politics is downstream from culture. Politics is this bad, and the culture, this big chunk of the culture, demands that it get worse. Morgan.
Yeah, and so I agree that what you end up seeing is a strong selectivity in the policing about what they're heavy-handed with and what they're really soft on. And the idea that they're going to be soft on a swastika, I think, is just unbelievable. If there was a march by the EDL or the now pretty rump-like BNP, and they were carrying swastikas down the street, I would very much expect that something would be done about that. Now, it's appearing at the pro-Palestine protests. Why on earth is that not something he would jump to? It's because there's an association with these protests that doesn't want to be brought out and there's something about it doesn't want to be done. And when you get into that selectivity of interpretation, you get into a real problem with your police force. And we see that all the time. And it's not only on this issue, these issues that people bring it up. I mean, it's a slightly different context, but people were very critical of the police for the way they handled the Sarah Everard protests during lockdown, because they viewed them as being very heavy-handed in their response to that. And Dame Cressida Dick got into a lot of trouble, although she's no longer the commissioner of the Met anymore. But the point being is that what we're seeing with policing is this strong selectivity, like over what they're going to wield the hammer and over what they're not. And that's a real problem of objectivity here. And the broader issue, I think, feeds into the way that, as I was saying, people don't want to recognize or just don't see anti-Semitism when it's right there in front of them, even in the form of a swastika. Now, we're going to talk about some other things later on where there's a bit more knowledge or nuance that might be required. I don't think actually all that much, but the fact that someone holding a swastika, the response could be, well, let's have a look at the context, is just unbelievable.
Marco.
Yeah, as I said earlier on, the level of policing in Britain is so broken that I suspect these officers, I don't think he's any more than a PC, like an ordinary officer. That they try to second guess what their bosses would like them to do, and of course because we've seen so much detachment from reality, rationality in the last 4 years. The fear, as I said earlier on, to offend somebody or to be called a racist. The problem the police here in Britain has been effectively scared into submission about some events that happened in the past. And yeah, they might have behaved in a racist way. They might have just reflected the culture of the time. But since then, the Met is absolutely scared stiff to be branded anti-something, and therefore they seem to allow everything which is within the the range of the victimhood brigade. So, as Richard said, they're quite happy to kneel at BLM protests. They're quite happy to dance about during the holy month of Pride. They're quite happy to let vandalism occur in front of their eyes when the environmentalists hit town. So there's the additional issue here that's very much specific to the police, but also the fact that people no longer have the moral clarity within themselves to realize what's right and what's wrong is one of the major issues. And the fact that these marches have been going on for now nearly 6 months, they are all marches in favor of a declared terrorist organization, in support of that organization, for the destruction of Jews. That's the contest. The contest has been set for 6 months. So what is there to talk about, really?
Yeah, the only context he's really referring to half the time is who is offended. And do I care about who is offended? Oh, no, it's the Jews. I don't really care. I would care if it were the Muslims who were offended. I would care if it were the gays who were offended. I would care if it was the environmentalists who were being offended, even if they were the ones breaking the law, even those destroying a statue because of a colonialist pass for a statue. I would look the other way, and I would, that's what happens here. So, for example, the fact that he's referring the woman who's complaining about it legitimately to oh, why don't you go back and look through the act? Why don't you go and read the act yourself? Go home and study up on it. I mean, is that the kind of response that you would give to any of those other groups that I just referred to? No, it isn't. So that goes to show the double standard that's taking place here. And the double standard is never more brought to light than seeing only a few weeks ago, 2 weeks or so, a guy with a sign saying Hamas is terrorist being the one bundled away from one of these protests, and the one bundled to the ground and arrested, and later de-arrested because it turns out that he hasn't done anything wrong, but it's him who is leapt upon by multiple officers instead of all of those surrounding him who are holding up the signs which don't state the truth and which do incite violence.
Yeah, by the way, Hamas is designated a terrorist organization by the government of this country, which, you would think just making a statement of a fact recognized by the government would not be an arrestable offense, whereas calling for the extermination of the Jews might be, or at least, might be something that the police wouldn't go out of their way to defend. But you also have to kind of wonder what would happen if the police did what needs to be done in these protests, because even if you allow the protest, there are enough people among the protesters who without a doubt would need to be arrested. What would happen then? What would the outcry be? What if the police actually, when they need to arrest somebody, went for it, even if there's resistance, which means they would probably have to use force and they would be filmed by everybody around them? What would the response be then? Of course, nobody's going to give that order. If somebody were to give that order, as soon as the videos come out, they would be fired and who knows what else. And so looking at these protests and what is happening is scary enough in terms of where we are culturally, and looking at them and thinking what would happen if there was any bit of rational pushback, I think makes the situation even more dire. Any other thoughts on this before we move on to other anti-Semites?
Yeah, I think how this is covered is telling as well. The BBC doesn't seem to be covering this one, although I noticed they are covering another story with a slightly similar theme, which is about football jerseys for German football supporters who are supposedly not allowed to have football jerseys with the number 44 on the back of their football jerseys, because the 44 looks like SS, and that's a Nazi symbol. So that's a context where Nazi symbols are understood and are instantly banned, and this is a context where they're not. Go figure.
I think as well, I mean, what you were mentioning that the BBC is not covering it, and the BBC tends to the left, but the Telegraph, for example, are covering this. I didn't check the BBC reporting, but I'll take your word on that. Unfortunately, given the tribalism that's going on, and we see everywhere and involved in so many things, anti-Semitism has this coloring where people perceive it as something that people on the right are concerned about, even though historically the right is associated with anti-Semitism. And if we were looking historically, you would think it's people on the left who are really concerned and activated about anti-Semitism, and yet today it's flipped. And for people who consider themselves to be anti-racist in any way, if you're a person on the left, if you're in any way soft on the anti-Semitism that's shown in the criticism of Israel or is going on at these protests, then you're completely betraying what is presumably to you a deeply held conviction and value, which is to be an anti-racist. And the way in which it's associated with people on the right, or you're viewed as a bit suspicious, as if you're on the right, if you're concerned about anti-Semitism, is just another way in which we see that tribalism playing out. And in a way that makes no sense at all. Why, if you're concerned about anti-Semitism, does that indicate that you're in some way conservative? And I think what we'll see, as we discuss this a bit more, is the way that the actions of Israel, a country and a government, are associated with Jews internationally, not just Jews within that country. And that's something that we're seeing going on at the protests. And for people who think there's something appropriate about that, if when Russia invaded Ukraine, what we saw across the world was a huge increase in, let's say, Russophobia of Russians, or a huge amount of prejudice or threats going against Eastern Orthodox Christians, I think that would chime to you as there's something really off about that, something really wrong about them being roped into it. And the fact that British Jews understandably feel quite unsafe and under threat because of a government which they, for a lot of them, don't have anything to do with. They were British, they were born here. They're either categorized as Jewish because of a cultural background or whatever. There's something extremely unjust about that and anti-Semitic about it. And yet people want to put their fingers in their ears the whole time.
So, yeah, the idea that being pro-Israel is associated with conservatism in this country, considering that the conservative government is so anti-Israel that they're threatening to recognize a Palestinian state months after the worst mass murder of Jews since the Holocaust would be laughable if it wasn't sad. I think we're going to go now to from anti-Semitism in the UK to anti-Semitism in the US, also kind of putting into question the idea that pro-Israel is a conservative viewpoint. But just to have a little not so depressing segue, we'll stop to thank our super chatters. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Mary Aline. Thank you, Politicas, who says, love this channel. Great work, Razi, and shalom all. Thank you. And Morgan, do you want to present the next one? Because you actually saw the whole clip. The rest of us made it through less of it.
I mean, I found this by searching for anti-Semitism on Twitter, and this is what popped up. But because this is them, so this is a clip of the Hodge Brothers, who are popular conservative influencers, shall we say, in the US, and they're presenting to you why they think that allegations of anti-Semitism are suspect, should we put it generously. And they want to make the case to you that this is just another form of wokeism that is manifesting in a different way, and they want to speak in defense of Candace Owens. But I'll let the clip speak for itself.
All we need is a cross right there and then put Christ as king. Yeah, to piss off the Jews. Yeah. Hey, y'all gotta give it to them Jews. They got some big balls. Especially to be in the conservative movement. Yeah. Hey, man, that's crazy, man, how they parted ways, Candace and Daily Wire. Mm-hmm. Candace talked all that shit about Negroes. Right? Women. Trash Negroes. Put them in a spot. Yeah. Rightfully so. Well, they need to be checked. They need to be checked. I check my people all the time. Yeah. But as soon as you criticize a damn Jew, it's a problem. It's a huge problem. Yeah. I'm starting to think Jewish community is almost as bad as the LGBTQ. Hey, let me say something about this. You know how like the LGBTQ, you can't criticize them. You're homophobic. Yeah. We've all seen that playbook before, right? What are the Jews doing? Candace didn't even. She's not anti-Semitic. Her comments about what's going on in Israel is not anti-Semitic. But what did they do? They took it from the LGBTQ playbook, the Democrat playbook. Just label you a bigot. Yeah. The Jews are doing the same thing the LGBTQ does. Yeah. Daily Wire's doing the exact same thing Big Tech does, censoring its own people.
So, I mean, it's a painful clip. The full thing's about 8 minutes long, but I think that gives you a good impression. And so just off the back of what I was just saying about the association of Jews internationally with Israel and them coming under prejudice and fire because of that, the Hodge brothers don't seem to want to make any distinction between the Jews and the Israelis. And one of the ways in which people who I think, not always, but often are motivated by anti-Semitism, provide a bit of cover for themselves is they say, look, this is the Zionists, or this is just the Israeli government. There's no pretense of that here. I mean, he even said, when you criticize a damn Jew, I mean, really tasteful, nice stuff, isn't it? So, I mean, I want to hear what you guys think about the clip as well. But
Well, I mean, one of the things, I'm sure many in our audience know who these guys are. If you don't, you probably say, why are we talking about these two retards with a phone camera? And sorry for people who are offended. Now I need to apologize for it. I don't know what the retard community thinks about this word, but I am referring to people who are voluntarily morons, not yeah. Anyway, these guys are famous. They're big stars on YouTube, and they used to be fitness YouTubers, then they started becoming conservative YouTubers. We've speaking of people we've pissed off on this channel, we once did a show how libertarianism is a gateway to the alt-right in many cases. Again, not for everyone, but I don't know how fitness is a gateway to fascism, but those guys apparently found that journey. But there's this big chunk now of, we're used to anti-Semitism from the left. We hear a lot more of it in recent months, but we're used to it. And now we see these big chunks in America. It's particularly disturbing. These big chunks of the so-called right, the MAGA, America First, which is very ironic for people who don't understand what America is to say America First, who are on, this is where they stand, and people who are rightly criticizing Biden and terrified of a second Biden term. Remember, a big chunk of the alternative is those people. And by those people, I mean people with very bad ideas, in case that can somehow be misunderstood as all right, I think this is the time for me to shut up. Marco.
Yeah, well, to be fair, these two guys are knuckleheads. I would expect them to understand what anti-Semitism is in the same way I don't understand them to understand. I don't expect them to understand what conservatism is, let alone freedom and all that comes with it. Well, yes, unfortunately, they seem to have a very big following. But then again, if the following is people like them who believe this kind of stupid stuff that comes out of their mouth, then it's an issue. But if it's just because people look at them and laugh at them, well, I'm a bit more hopeful for humankind. What do we mean with anti-Semitism in the first place? Let's explain the terms. Semites, you see often on social media, people say, "Oh yeah, Muslims are Semites as well." So there's no difference between Israel and Gaza, whatever. Well, that's a big load of horse manure, because anti-Semitism is historically meant the hate and the discrimination versus Jews. That's the way it's been understood. That's the way it's been used, and that's the way it is. So there's no way trying to reframe this thing. And every time you campaign or you say that Israel shouldn't defend itself from the attack from Gaza, from Hezbollah, wherever they come, you effectively say Israel shouldn't exist. And by saying that, you're saying that all the Jews in the area should be dead. And that's where anti-Semitism comes from. These people don't make this kind of connections, unfortunately. And I'm really sorry for somebody who's a genuine conservative, who actually has got a few working neurons as well, who has to be put in the same box as this kind of people. It's a shame, but on the other hand, if you don't stand up, if you don't fight back, if you don't start standing back at the people who purposely talk on your behalf as well, then probably this kind of stuff should happen to you because you deserve it. If you know better, come back to these guys and say, "Oh, actually, you're wrong. Yeah, you shouldn't say this kind of stupid stuff." And we try and do this on this channel all the time. When somebody comes up with something stupid, we like to point out and say, "You're wrong because the situation is actually different." We can't anymore ignore this kind of attitude, this kind of behavior, this kind of ideas. It's time that people who believe, who recognize where the good is, stood up for what good is and fought a beat back.
Just on Marco's point there about comments that we often get on these videos and as you say, in social media about trying to wipe out the term anti-Semite as if it doesn't applies wider than the Jews. That seems to me as an attempt to rewrite the history books and make sure that any historical reference to it is suddenly a bit more blurry than because it could relate to anybody in the region. So all of it has an intent behind it. It's very clear to anybody who studied history that term, applies to what happened in the Holocaust and since. I think when it comes to these two guys, well, honestly, I mean, when you're watching them, you just feel your brain shrinking so small it's about to fall out of your ear, which is probably what's happened to both of them. It's very painful to watch, but of course, this is the kind of level that many people take their knowledge at. This is a prevalent way for many people to get what they consider to be the key arguments and to spout them on again and to feel justified in doing so. So that's the importance in tackling this. And I think to Morgan's point that this lays out more clearly than a Finkelstein or some academic that can dress it up in other language, slip in Zionism there instead of anti-Semitism in order to conceal what they're really saying. Whereas here is shown in the harsh light of day exactly what they mean. And of course, that's exactly what most people mean when they use the term Zionist as well. So this is insightful in terms of showing what the core thinking is for so many, despite how ugly that thinking is.
Yeah, thanks, Marilyn, for the super chat. Marilyn says, never heard of him, but it's fun to hear you try to dig yourself out of a hole, Razi. And then she puts in quotes, those people. Yeah, as Richard was saying, you listen to the I blame them basically for making me stupid, which is a good reason for us to, unless there's anything else on this clip, to go to the next clip that we have of them.
No, let's go to the next. Oh yeah, we just have the one. Okay, never mind. Never mind.
Do you want to set up the next one, Daniel, and we can in the meantime thank Jonathan for the super chat and
well, I was just
somebody who isn't me has anything more to say about that first clip.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that amongst some people, I don't think amongst these guys, I mean, I really have no insight into their mental functioning because how much of it is going on. I think there is some confusion amongst some people who are seeing the vast array of media output around Israel and who, when the point about anti-Semitism is maybe made too briefly or not well enough, feel genuinely confused about why so much allegations of anti-Semitism go on. Now, I think the point about anti-Semitism is twofold. One, that so many of the classic, if you like, anti-Semitic archetypes come up in the criticism of Israel, and often rope in all Jews internationally, not just any Jews living in Israel. Not that that would be appropriate either, but so that's what's going on. So the Jews are controlling everything. They're underhanded. They're manipulating aid out of the United States. They're really focused on killing children, which is of course reminiscent of all the old blood libels where Jews are killing children and baking their blood into bread and so on, right? So that's part of what the anti-Semitism point is going on. But also, it's the degree of intensity of the criticism of Israel doesn't add up. Even if you're someone who's a pacifist and anti-war, right? It doesn't add up just to say that this is the normal kind of opposition you see to war that goes on in the world. The war in Israel, every time it breaks out, and particularly since October 7th, has really set the culture on fire in a way that suggests there's something deeper going on here. And the fact that it involves the Jews and involves people end up slipping into bringing in Jews per se, not just Israelis, is very indicative of that point and how people are thinking about it. And anti-Semitism is a peculiar prejudice. I mean, any prejudice is peculiar, but I understand that it strikes people as odd because it is odd, but it's a prejudice which has such a long history, going back to the medieval period and beyond, really, that when people are becoming increasingly irrational in our culture, and they're increasingly conspiratorial and willing to entertain the arbitrary, it's like a nice prepackaged set that they can just take off the shelf and put on and adopt without even always fully recognizing it. I think that's what you see going on.
I just quickly want to, so Mary Aline says in the chat, I'm in no way defending the Hodge brothers. They appear to be scum, just teasing Razi. Yeah, I do appreciate, I love the super chat tease. Those are the best kind. And yeah, you know, I try to make moments like that the exception to the rule. I think the Hodge brothers, it's kind of their whole shtick. Then again, they get the views, so maybe I should have a few more such moments. And Ideology says, I saw a few Hasidic Jews on Saturday protesting Israel, shouting amongst others, including from the river to the sea, that the counter-protesters were evil yokes, anti-Semite Jews. So these are Nature Carta. We've mentioned them in the past. They don't really deserve a mention, but they're, you know, these guys believe that the Messiah will only come back, or there shouldn't be a Jewish state, or the Jews shouldn't go back to Israel, or something like that until the Messiah comes back. Sorry, I'm not exactly a theologian here, but yeah, that's their idea, and they go to these protests for some reason to support the killing of all Jews who aren't on the same in the same, you know, of the same view. And yeah, somebody sent me a clip of them talking on Turkish television, and I was like, this is exactly the point of them. You know, the point is that you can always say, hey, we're just anti-Israel, we're anti-Zionist, we're not anti-Jews. Look, we have Jews. You know, these are, and those, and they, and everything they say in that clip is, oh, we're so ashamed to be Jews. So basically, they are making the point that this is not just about Israel. It is about Jews.
Lovely. Should we go to the next clip then?
Do we have a next clip? Apparently we don't. I think I made a mistake there. I don't think we have a next clip.
Okay, sorry. I thought there was. Mark and Richard. Sorry,
Richard has something to say.
No worries. Yeah, I was just going to tie this back to what I said at the beginning about people's inability to think and form concepts, and look at the lack of thinking involved here. I mean, obviously these two make Candace Owens look intelligent and coherent, so there's that. But even within what they're saying, the fact that they're throwing out big tech as another example of what they're talking about as censoring things and stopping people from saying what they want to say. All of that shows the disconnected randomness of these thoughts that are sort of dumped together in a bag of collected stuff that doesn't have any link to it logically at all. And then when it comes to all the collective blaming of different groups when it comes under racism or homophobia, or when it comes under things being called colonialist, for example. And we've all rolled our eyes at the disconnected way in which that's applied to all sorts of totally unrelated events, as if to suggest there's an entire agenda that underpins everything in existence for the last 200 years or more. So to me, this just exposes the way in which people can't think anymore. They can't even step back a second and say, hang on, what goes with what? What two things are tied together in order to make sense? They take any aspect of it, any non-essential aspect of it, and go, oh, look, those two are the same. And that's what leads people down such a terrible path when it comes to, well, to use a big term, the epistemology of their thinking, but just their general thinking anyway, at any level. And we're not expecting everybody to be at the kind of objectivist level that can analyze, words or thinking in the way that Leonard Peikoff can, but to have any basic understanding of where your premise begins and what logic follows from it, and therefore what's consistent, that's all gone. And that leads to so many blind alleys and some of the negativity we're seeing out there in the world.
It's really hard to understand why being Jewish seems to be a problem. I mean, I can understand some people don't grasp the deeper implication of the current conflict going on against Gaza, but to bundle a whole, I don't know, a whole group under the umbrella Jew, and then equating a Jew who's never been to Israel to the events that are now going on in Israel, in the Middle East, seems to be particularly dumb. I can understand people don't have the mental capacity to realize what the principles involved in the self-defense war that Israel is engaged in. I can understand that, because that goes beyond the perceptual. You have to think a second there, but to assume that you can just carry on the kind of hate that's been baked and fostered since, I don't know, a couple of thousand years ago, since Christianity came into became the business. It's particularly dumb. Also because, like any other form of racism, begins to separate the individual from its real context. If somebody does something wrong, it's only fair that they get condemned, or they've been told, or even go to jail for whatever they do wrong. But to extrapolate the individual from the group and say, you got something to do with somebody else, therefore you're guilty, it's just idiotic. Like every other form of racism is just hard to understand. And as you said, Morgan, it's got nothing to do about war and peace and anything like that, because we haven't seen the same reaction about Ukraine. Ukraine, as again, is the innocent party, has been invaded by Russia. Did people go out and say, oh, Russia must go for a ceasefire? No. However, when Israel is involved, when there's a Jew inside, all this kind of haters come out to play and make themselves heard. And that's got to go beyond the event itself. It's really hard to work out what's in these people's brain that makes them behave like this. It's really unfathomable.
It's interesting to see that at some point, in their response to kind of their way of standing up to the Jews is, let's put a cross and say Christ is king. Is it a big thing, Jews going around protesting YouTube videos where there's a cross and somebody says Christ is king? Or is it just mostly the people who are against Jews protesting against Jews not wanting to be murdered? I mean, it's generally, if you're bigoted in any way, your starting point is divorced from reality, because you are, mixing what Ayn Rand called the metaphysically given and the man-made, and making assumptions about the choices that people make that are by your bigotry, you are assuming that those choices are informed by immutable characteristics. But the way it manifests itself is often very interesting. I kind of noticed that, and it's I think the one bit of the few minutes that I watched of this clip that didn't annoy me as much, because I thought, is this a thing, or are you making it up on the go? And are your millions of viewers listening to that and actually thinking, oh yeah, this is a thing. Let's now all do this and annoy the Jews. Which may be the case. It may be that their audience. We've said about Al Jazeera and the Guardian and so on that in some cases their bias is so clear and their arguments are so weak that they're kind of making a statement on what they think about their audience, and that statement is often probably right. And I wonder if that is the case here as well. Morgan.
I think what you see with them as well is the bankruptcy of the anti-woke or internet, let's say loosely kind of free speech coalition. Now, not because free speech is being spoken about here, but just because that's how a lot of them are grouped in. Because when a lot around critical race theory, DEI, wokeism or stuff is coming up prominently in the culture in the mid-2010s, these people gained a lot of prominence, and some of them were making a good pushback against some of these ideas. And one of the things that I would wonder about them is, are these guys being too reactive in their pushback against some of this stuff? So even if there's a real concern around some of these ideas they're opposing, will they just be reactive in the sense that they'll deny racism or sexism flat out in any instance where it may legitimately be occurring? And I think what you're seeing here is that they're just a kind of jack in the box that pops up and says the same thing no matter what the context is, because there's very clear reasons to be concerned about anti-Semitism in the Western world, very clearly since October 7th. But even beforehand, there would have been signs and signals people should have been picking up on. And yet all they can say is to dribble out the same line that they would trot out before, which is that, look, now this is the same playbook that the LGBT woke movement has been using the whole time. So you just have to oppose it in the same way. And so these people, they aren't actually trying to look at reality and see what are there any real prejudices that I should be concerned about in opposing. They just have, they were saying about taking from the LGBT playbook. They've got their own playbook, and they're just going to read it out rote every time, no matter how legitimately concerned they should be. So, and there's a lot of people on that side, let's say, who, Candace Owens, we've spoken about her anti-Semitism, but even the ones who aren't being openly anti-Semitic, they're really, really soft on all of this stuff. And that's a real shame.
There was a point when they said something like, the Jewish community needs to call out their own, or the LGBT community, right? And they said something like that, and then they said, like, we do it, we call out people in our community. And I'm thinking, what does that mean? Like, if there's a Black Lives Matter protest, do I need to go to the Hodge Brothers or other Black people and demand that is basically, by the way, that's what Black Lives Matter did, in the summer of 2020. They'd go up to people and say and demand that they take the knee or whatever. So yeah, the bigotry, even if it's towards a specific group, it is kind of it's going to be across the board in one way or another. Marco.
Yeah, I mean, this reasoning that I call out my group as well, it's something that Candace Owens often uses, isn't it? I criticize my side as well. I mean, even that, talking about my side, is so tribalist. It's not even bearable to listen to. But by doing this, they effectively build a kind of virginity for themselves, like, oh, I'm not anti anyone because, look, I criticize my lot as well. However, if they're so keen on the free speech, where were they when Charlie Hebdo happened? Did they publish pictures of Mohammed? I don't think so, because they go for soft targets. No longer they're not particularly clever. Not only they're not particularly clever, but they're also cowards. They go for the soft target, for the people who know perfectly well are not gonna snap back at them, and that's why they seem to go for the people who are least likely to fight back, and that's not only stupid but also very, very cowardly.
Sure. I mean, the tribalism on display here, the good people, bad people, who's in which column, who's on my team, who's on your team, that just pervades every way in which these things are tackled these days. I mean, our point is not that these idiots should be censored. That, you know, they're stupid. It's a bigoted opinion. But I mean, we've played a clip of it, for example. We're not trying to say that they shouldn't exist. They should be laughed at. They should be called out on it. That's the point of including them here as well. I think that needs saying.
Yeah. By the way, during Charlie Hebdo, they were teaching people how to increase their 1 rep max for deadlifts. So they were probably not talking about politics at all. But yeah, it is interesting because back then, this is also another thing about the journey of the sides of the political map, or the parts of the spectrum which kind of you're supposed to stay on whatever side it is, no matter what the ideas are and how they change. Yeah, there was a time when not that long ago, like during my adult life, when being right wing meant you saw Islamic terrorism as a problem. In part, that meant you saw Islamic terrorism as a problem rather than Muslims being the victims and terrorism being their form of resistance. So I don't know what they were doing at the time other than fitness videos. By the way, that's speaking of, I think we talked about people I think people like Milo, or people who were kind of anti something bad and seemed like they might be decent, and then you actually hear what they think. Yeah, that's another thing. Then you get it across the board. Now you get it with YouTubers, because YouTube is a thing, so you can have it with fitness YouTubers. In the past it would be Hollywood stars and so on, which is just annoying as well, because you really like an actor or an actress, and then they say something unscripted, and then you no longer like them. But here's what it is. Morgan.
Nobody's under any duty per se to go out and oppose a prejudice that exists in their culture, and everyone has to factor in their own values. But I have to say that anti-Semitism was something which I think everyone would have perhaps too casually assumed was a prejudice that was completely cut out of the Western mind for a long time. And if you're someone who can see it so clearly coming up, raising its ugly head again, and all your response can be is to sneer at it, and then like these guys to say, the damn Jews, they just cry when they've been hurt. They want to play rough, and now they're being crybullies. You are completely contemptible. And people just need to ask themselves, if I would count myself as someone who's against these kind of things, am I taking this seriously? And am I doing something within the context of my own life about it? You don't have to go and be a protester on the streets. You don't have to be an activist. You don't have to do podcasts about it. But are you going to sit by and watch it happen? And yeah, the way in which the right has just devolved into, I'm not going to use a crass term, but just singing from the old playbook, no matter what the context is just utterly contemptible. I have no regard for these people anymore.
Yeah, we have division of labor here. I'm the one using crass terms. But by the way, people, one easy thing you can do is comment. Comments are, as far as we can tell, the best thing algorithm-wise, other than watching the show. And share it. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe. And of course, you can also become a paying member, which helps us greatly, and also gives you access to exclusive content at the cheapest levels of membership. That gives you access to, I believe, over 3 hours of content, additional content a week, and not content about Israel, content about philosophy and other stuff. So there's a link in the description. Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Any final comments, Marco?
Well, it's a shame that in this day and age, when, as Mora said, you expected this kind of stupid irrational behavior to be extinguished from the planet, we see it come up again. And not only that, but we see policemen falling for it, losing a moral courage to actually stand up to it, and that's quite worrying.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look at how that policeman in the first clip starts to say, when asked about swastikas, starts to use the phrase, well, to some people, and then he can't even finish the phrase himself because he knows he can't say, well, swastikas are fine, because he knows they're not, even even under his own sense of morality. So it's the cowardice involved, which is clear. And that's clear for both clips, to be honest. The cowardice that's evident in who's chosen to be criticized and when, and who isn't. That's what runs through all of these things, even if some of it needs an interpreter to understand some of the wording. In fact, if Razi can't understand the Cockney, then I struggle with these two guys, leading especially the gym speak that you referred to earlier. I don't know what half of that meant, but hey.
Well, if you want to understand it better, I would recommend the Hodge twins from back when, but actually they don't need the views or the help with the algorithm. Morgan.
Nothing extra, maybe just to say about the term anti-Semitism, because people bring that up a lot. I mean, the term anti-Semite was coined by an anti-Semite to describe his own opinions. And certainly it was intended, and, whilst he was, I'm forgetting his name, but he was dissecting all this racial ethnic minutiae. So whilst he was lumping in all Semites, he certainly had the Jews in mind, and the other anti-Semites weren't mistaken about that. So I don't think the term needs to be changed. If what you were to see happen was it were to become a smear term in a way like Islamophobia, and you wanted to start using anti-Muslim hatred, that could theoretically happen, but I don't see it in that way or used in that way. And I mostly, not everyone, but mostly when I hear people bring that up, I think it's just because they're a bit uncomfortable with the anti-Semitism that's going on, and they don't really want to call it out.
By the way, I see a comment here that I only see out of context and I haven't read the others, so I don't know the context, but Adam says sponsored by Facebook. I'm sure it's not in reference to us, but it should be. Zuck, if you want to do some good with that money, give me a call. We do sponsored episodes as well, so we will, we'll have to talk about the wording of the ad, but I'm sure we can work something out. James Valiant says, here's a comment for commenting's sake. Thank you for that as well. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We're back with the Daily Objective and the reality show tomorrow. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.